Well, good evening, everyone. Hello. Good evening to everyone in the chat joining us this evening. Fun and games I'm sure are ahead of us for this evening. But as you can see, I've got Ben joining me this evening. So I'll let Ben introduce himself, and then we'll go into a topic while we're here. So Ben, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name's Ben Emlyn Jones. I am a conspiracy theorist, as the title suggests. It's not really a slur anymore, so I don't mind calling myself that. But I met Ollie a few years ago, and we did an interview on my show, which was pretty good, I thought. So I'm back to talk again. No doubt Ollie and I will have different opinions, but I do hope it will be interesting and entertaining for everybody. So my viewers will join as well. If you are, please be nice to Ollie and to his other listeners, because let's keep it good-natured.
Right. So let's get to the reason why we're here. So I happened to tune into one of your live streams about the ongoing current conflict in Ukraine. I'm sure, Ben, you would agree with me that what's essentially going on in Ukraine right now really isn't very good at all. No. It certainly does need a very diplomatic touch, certainly a more deft hand than certainly one Boris Johnson can provide, considering today he's been laughed at by Putin and most of the press over there. So they're certainly not taking any of his interventions seriously. I would hope far more, to be honest, that Boris would far more join with France and Germany in what's called the Normandy meetings, where they've been meeting with Russia in an attempt to, again, try and get a European solution with this as well. I prefer, obviously, the US to join in these talks as well, rather than Russia trying to bypass essentially most of the European nations, because if a war does break out, then it is indeed the European continent that is indeed going to suffer, as most definitely, unfortunately, the people of Ukraine are going to, suffer as well. So if you want to give again your take on the situation and what I just said there.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I do really hope this doesn't escalate any further. I think it's a terrible situation. I hope that a way can be found out of this without any bloodshed. There's already been an awful lot in the last few years, in the last 8 years actually. It's very, very tragic. Any kind of attempt to attack Ukraine would, of course, would be really, really terrible. It would be undoable, and it would be incredibly destructive for both the Russian and Ukrainian people. Experiences of Afghanistan during the Soviet era should be a lesson enough to be learnt. You can't just invade and take over a country, no matter how big you are, and no matter how small the country you want to take over is. Although I don't think you'll probably disagree. I don't think that's the ultimate objective of the Russian administration at the moment. However, again, it's the more there can be dialogue, the better. Although Boris Johnson, of course, has lost all credibility in the last few months. He's ridiculous. So again, I don't think he's the one who's going to dig anyone out of this. What I'm concerned about here is that in the news, whenever I read the news about this situation, I'm reminded of a song by Peter Gabriel. It's called "That Voice Again." It's on the So album, and it contains the lyric, "I'm hearing right and wrong so clearly. There must be more than this." And that certainly goes for the source documents you yourself refer to in your videos about this subject. To give you some examples of what was said, they described Putin as an unstable narcissist. That was the New European. They talk about outright dictatorship. That was a word that was used.
Yeah. Don't you think that he is, considering about the horse, the cult of personality that definitely surrounds Putin in Russia? Almost certainly is. Definitely quite a narcissist, quite an authoritarian dictator, arresting journalists, prisoning the opposition, stopping any and all protests, cracking very heavily down on any, gay rights, anything like that in Russia have been almost completely quelled. I don't think that's very good, to be honest, in Putin's corner. I don't think he's a very nice man, to be honest.
It's not an ideal situation. At the same time, they are, from his point of view, if you take a point of view from his own position, and based on what he says, he essentially feels that his country is under siege. And it's possible that if that wasn't the case, rather like it's not unlike what George Galloway said about Cuba, although I don't agree with the Cuban regime and I don't support George Galloway in any way. He did make the point, that you can't really have free and fair elections and things like that when you're essentially being surrounded, and it's a kind of like pre-war situation. And although you may not think that you may not think that the other side is the aggressor, he sees it that way. And I don't think the mainstream media is really covering it fairly, in my view.
Russia is absolutely the aggressor in all this.
Oh.
It is Russia who has been not only having cyber attacks and asymmetrical warfare against not only Ukraine, but annexing parts of Georgia, even Crimea. We've seen also attacks against the Baltic states as well, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia as well. Any pullback of NATO, as Putin has asked for, has been his main ask, will almost certainly leave those nations essentially at the mercy of Russia. Putin essentially wants to create spheres of influence, and creating a sphere of influence is an incredibly backwards way of going about essentially ensuring your safety. Because if Putin wants to push NATO back, then surely Russia should pull back as well. But that's not going to happen.
Well, it's thing is like a sphere of influence is one thing, but except one of the articles you read used the term forced Russianization, and that implies essentially conquest and genocide. A sphere of influence is not the same thing. I mean, what is exact? Do you really think he simply wants to rebuild the Russian Empire and have it, much of Eastern Europe under his complete control? Do you really think he wants to do that?
Putin has talked continuously in many, many speeches throughout the year how he does want to essentially reestablish the sphere of influence of not only the USSR, but reclaim what he calls and what he sees as rightful Russian clay. Not only that, but the Nationalist Party in the Duma also definitely agrees with him. In fact, one of them recently said in the Duma just this week that they say the only reason out of this is for Putin to go to war. They want him to go to war. There is a heavily nationalistic side and party in Russia that will force Putin's hand in this if he backs down, unless he at least comes away with some very significant territorial or some agreement in kind. There is no way that Putin is going to back down from this, at least not anytime soon.
Well, obviously, I hope a war doesn't emerge out of this. I really, really don't. That'll be the last thing we need. It really, really will. But where was I? Let's look at some examples though, because we've been told what I gather from the media, from the mainstream media, is, for example, take Crimea. Now, Crimea actually was annexed by Russia in 1783. So it was originally, I think, it was controlled by Turkey. Now, it was then during the Soviet era, it started off as an independent SSFR, that's Soviet Federal Socialist Republic. Now, it was only in World War II it was downgraded to an oblast, essentially a county of Russia, the Russian SSFR, during these are sort of subdivisions of the USSR. And in 1954, Premier Khrushchev, which sort of rubber stamping effort, put it into the Ukrainian equivalent of the Russian SSFR, which didn't really matter much at the time, and many more really than the county boundaries. When they shifted in 1974, for example, Abingdon in Oxfordshire was originally part of Berkshire, it became part of Oxfordshire, things like that. It was only in 1991 when Ukraine gained its independence from the dying Soviet Union that this became an issue. So what happened was, in the document, Crimea was recognized as an autonomous Republic of Crimea, it was called, even though Ukraine was established as an independent state. And I don't understand that. I don't quite get the details, but in some way, Crimea was attached to Ukraine. Yet the sovereignty of Ukraine, for example, is not black and white, not least because it's mostly made up of people who consider themselves Russian. And I haven't gone into all the details of this, but from what I can see, possibly we've been lied to about other things in this situation. Is it possible we have been?
Not true that most people in Ukraine consider themselves Russian. Indeed, only about 29% consider themselves ethnically Russian, and that number in itself is falling. Indeed, people who, again, let me hang on, get my map up because it'll be good for. There we go. So this is obviously, you can see, is our map of Russia. And this side here, let me just get my little pen. So this side here is all predominantly and mostly what would come down where most people identify as being fully Ukrainian.
That's
Now,
right, yeah.
there are, of course, there's a little part here that consider themselves Romanian. There's also a small enclaves here. That's Slovakia. There's little enclaves all along the same here. It's the same for any country. There's parts in again in northern Germany that are Danish enclaves. There's parts even in northern Italy that consider themselves German enclaves. So the idea that you can just go around claiming areas just because there's a small enclave really doesn't cut the mustard here, because when you go over again to the river over on this side of it, this is where you start to get the mixtures going on. Now, the actual only strongest part of people who consider themselves fully Russian was even indeed in Crimea. So to say that it's all like this mix, hang on, let me just get a different color, is again completely false. But you saw in again when Putin annexed Crimea, the popularity of Russia and the pro-Russianism in Ukraine dropped drastically. So anything like this, any more moves against this, is ultimately going to cause yet another probably ultimate decline in the pro-Russian statements of Ukraine. Not to mention, of course, the Euromaidan revolution that happened over a very, very pro-Putin leader who got kicked out in favor of the pro-Western leader.
Okay, so on word on the demographics of Crimea. Now, obviously, I can't ask the Crimeans what they believe. They may have had opinion polls, but from what I gather, in the terms of the ethnic change in Crimea, the only actual ethnicity that has actually declined is the Crimean Tatars. In 1785, they were 84.1%. Today, they are 10.6%. It says here Russians 67.9%. I suppose they work this out through language, which language you speak. I mean, you can't really do genetic testing to tell whether you're Russian or Ukrainian, because probably they're about the same in terms racially. They're probably identical. Orthodoxy, again, Russian Orthodox Church 58%. I don't know what the church in Ukraine is. Does it have a state established church? So presumably, do you believe that the election, that is the referendum of reunification, whether that's fair or not, of Russia, was rigged? Do you believe that was a rigged election?
Yes. All international observers pretty much have said that the ones that have been held in Crimea have been ultimately rigged and unfair in favor of Putin.
Okay, so if you go back through time, through history, Crimea has been mostly either autonomous. It's been mostly an autonomous. It was actually annexed by Russia for a while, then it was recognized as an autonomous republic. So I don't think it's as black and white as you say.
To be honest, you don't even have to go back that far. You only have to go back to obviously the fall of the USSR. The fall of the USSR is really when we have to really start talking about Ukraine properly as a country. This is when it first properly gained its democratic legitimacy. And that is really probably the most important part, because not only did Ukraine get its diplomatic legitimacy, Hungary got it as well. Again, Czech Republic of Czechoslovakia, Slovakia, Romania, Hungary, again Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, all gained their proper independence. Even though again some countries did obviously exist before that, but this was their first true freedom from the USSR. So you have to, I think, when you're looking at this, you don't go or have to go all the way back that far. You just have to go back to obviously the beginning of the 90s, when these countries first began to become proper democratic countries. And I think that what's happened now is we've seen here, obviously the annexing of Crimea was done nothing but favorable for Putin. He did it at a time when, again, he was facing very, very strong resistance at home. The Russian people did ultimately end up favoring the annexation, and Putin's popularity did soar from it. And of course, the problem area we are seeing is the flashpoint here is in the Donetsk and the I can't remember how you pronounce it now. Luhansk, that's it.
Yeah.
So, and that sort of, let me just draw on that. That's sort of around here-ish. Not exactly a perfect.
I know the
perfect line.
You mean, yeah.
But it's roughly in that area. That area there. So that's the area that we've been talking about. That's the area that's been the big flashpoint over this time. But again, even this area, again, it's not predominantly people who consider themselves Russian. This area has been funded by Putin, by secessionists, by again radical elements that he has funded to essentially revolt, and then he can just go, oh well, guess you're Russian now, and just yoink that piece of Crimea. He could very, very easily well do this in other countries as well, not just Ukraine. And again, if he gets away with it here, there's nothing to stop him from doing it to any of the other Eastern European countries. This is why they want to join NATO, because it's for no other reason that they are worried about Russian aggression. This is the only solid reason why they are doing this. They do not want to be part of Russia. They do not want to be included in their sphere of influence. They do not want their democracies or anything like that to be interfered with. But Putin continuously does this. So his only agenda is to, again, as I said at the beginning, is to reestablish his sphere of influence and, again, take what he considers rightful Russian clay, bringing it back into Russia.
All right. Well, I would not advocate any breaches of the sovereignty of these nations. I wouldn't. I mean, they were right to gain their independence from the USSR, and I wouldn't advocate for that process to be reversed in any way. So, indeed, I know you disagree with me on this as well, but I am actually pro-independence for EU nations as well. I actually think it's ironic, actually, Ukraine, there's a movement to join the Continental Federation that Britain has just escaped from, and we've won our independence. So I support national sovereignty. I support these ideas of national sovereignty. What I'm concerned about, what I'm concerned about is that I'm not 100% convinced that, well, I'll just repeat a point. I'm not going to repeat a point I made before, but like I said, I'm not 100% convinced that that is the ultimate objective if Russia is just allowed to run rampant. I really, really don't. I am concerned that I don't want it to be war. I don't want it to be an invasion. I mean, as I said to you, I think you were on the live stream. I did say that Putin has granted citizenship to the people in the Donbass, that is, the people who consider themselves a part of the Republic of Luhansk and Donetsk, which I know is not recognized internationally as a sovereign state. He's issued them passports. If he's concerned about their welfare in Ukraine, is there any danger to the welfare of ethnic Russians in Ukraine? Do you believe?
No, there is no danger to them whatsoever. Putin uses what he calls the language laws. But as far as I'm concerned, most of these Ukraine has them, as do Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. The Baltic countries also have them as well. The countries have come under, again, Russian occupation, Russian aggression, and for years, their own native language was pretty much destroyed and trashed by, again, the USSR and what was pretty much Russian sphere of influence. They were forced to speak, ethnically, speak Russian. And these countries have trying to be, since they've, again, regained independence back in, 1991 with the fall of the USSR, they've been trying to reestablish their own culture, for example, has been a massive one. Again, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia all have, again, very close, similar ties to their culture. Ukraine, obviously, again, other side of the sea, so to say. But again, they have their own culture as well that they want to promote, and they feel that, again, it is their right to promote their own culture. It's, we wouldn't just suddenly start passing a law saying that, the Scots aren't allowed to wear tartan, even though that was a law back in the day. I think it's foolish to again do this, but they are allowed to sort of perform this de-Russification of their country. Like I say, it's their country, and they have suffered immensely under that occupation that the USSR put them under.
Yeah, I mean the Russian Federation and the USSR. Did you equate them as essentially something very similar?
Yes, pretty much so. Yeah.
Because the USSR was founded after the Bolshevik Revolution, is based on Marxism, Leninism. The today's Russia is nothing like that. And I mean, I know what you mean about the USSR. I mean, for example, Ukraine, in fact, probably Ukraine has suffered almost as much as any country could under the Soviet jackboots. I mean, in 1931 to 1932, after the collectivization of the farms in Ukraine, and basically the Soviets moved in and stole all the farm produce. The people had nothing to eat, and they died. I mean, millions died that winter. So of course, yeah, I realise that that kind of thing is horrible. But I don't see. This is I don't have all the information in my head, but you see, Putin has been taking. It's true, to be fair to you, Putin has been influenced, I think, by a political philosopher called Alexander Dugin, who is he promotes something called Eurasianism, which does talk about creating like a federation to cover all of Europe and Asia. Yet they have clashed over strategy. I don't know details now.
That is what I've said at the right beginning. That would essentially establish spheres of influence for Russia. That is what Putin intends. And again, these Eastern European countries are wanting to join NATO for that exact reason. They are very fearful of Russian aggression. They do not want that to happen, because if the West abandons them, the fate of Ukraine will probably befall as well the Baltic countries, almost certainly Poland. We could see Romania and Moldova certainly potentially fall under that sphere of influence as well. Hungary, maybe Republic of Czechoslovakia, and of course Slovenia as well. Sorry, not I keep on getting them always mixed up. But yeah, these are again very worrying things that will happen. Putin has said this is what he wants to happen, and Putin is a guy who, whenever he says I'm going to do this, he does end up doing this.
So these basically are all the former Warsaw Pact countries. Do you believe he actually wants to create some kind of? I mean, you say he's actually said that. He's actually said he wants to create not just a sphere of influence, not just an alliance, a federation.
This wouldn't be a European Union federation. Like I say, the EU does have a parliament. There are, again, electoral systems. It happens all very, very democratically in the EU. This would not be the same. This would be Russian dominated, and there would be no ifs, ands, or buts. You would do what Russia says. You would not be allowed to join any world other organizations unless Russia gives its approval. You would not be allowed to, again, join NATO. Putin would ultimately, again, indeed force countries like Poland, Hungary out of the EU, not through their own choice, but through, again, Putin putting pressure on them to do so. That, again, we cannot have that. Setting up a sphere of influence is incredibly backwards. We should not allow this, to be honest, in today's global community, full stop.
Well, it's if you get me started on the EU, we'll go way off topic. But yeah, you say it's ironic. You say, for example, that the sentence you just said was quite a bit contradictory. You said we can't allow spheres of influence in today's global community. But what is the global community? Is the global community different from what Putin is envisaging? Then you really believe that for example, NATO. I mean, NATO is a product of the Cold War. I mean, do you know, for example, Admiral Lord Hill Norton, the ufologist? I was actually on the organizing committee of NATO in 1949. And of course, it was set up to counter the threat from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is hit back with the Warsaw Pact. Now, the Cold War's been over, I'd say, for 35 years. It depends when you date it. If you date it, the most accurate date, I'd say sometime in the late 1980s, it just cooled down and went away. If you told someone back then that NATO would still exist in 2022, they'd think you were crazy. So, as John Pilger said on RT, why does this thing still exist? Why is it simply because Russia's gone from being the big bad red menace to being the big bad whatever it is now menace? Do you believe that?
Well, NATO, the only reason NATO still exists is because of Russian aggression.
Right.
That is the only reason NATO exists. The whole reason, like you can see the expansion of the map here. All the countries that wanted to join are all Eastern European countries because, again, they have been put under immense pressure by not only Russian direct military action, but also subversive actions by Vladimir Putin. We've seen, again, cyber attacks increase across Europe during the past couple of months, have gone through the roof in places, again, like Ukraine, Poland, again, Hungary. All these places are being systematically attacked asymmetrically by Russia.
So obviously Putin can't dictate which country does or does not join NATO. I mean, that's, for example, I think he'd like Ukraine not to join NATO, but he can't force them not to. I mean, it's up to them eventually. I would recommend that they do. Yeah. Well,
this may be what it's all about. This entire, again, literally surrounding Ukraine. Like I say, there are troops as we speak at the moment on the way from Russia's eastern military district, which is over 6,000 kilometers on the other side of the country. Why are all these troops suddenly arriving not only at the Ukrainian border, but across the Belarus border as well, and in Crimea as well?
Well, in one of the videos you made on this subject, you read out the article from The Guardian, which suggests this is some kind of posturing. And I mean, I hope that's true. I do. I wouldn't want this to be a serious invasion force. Several military analysts have said this is not enough for an invasion force. So it's the wrong kind of thing. It's not enough. It's the wrong kind of hardware and troops, and there's not enough of them. Things like that. But when it comes to sovereign states, I'd recommend that Ukraine does not join NATO. I would recommend that it does not join the EU. Obviously, it's up to them what they choose to do.
Well, it looks like, again, according to most of their public, they have very favorable ratings, again, for not only joining the EU, but again, for NATO membership as well.
Oh, it's up to them. However, from a Russian perspective, you see, it does look like NATO is extending. According to Vladimir Putin, he was told in the early 90s, I think it was when it was Yeltsin first, then he became president, that NATO would not expand beyond its Cold War borders. That is basically, well, leaving aside the old East Germany, of course, which no longer exists, there will be no eastward expansion of NATO at all. And now NATO is expanding. And so
that was never promised. That was never ever promised. That was never promised. That was never put into a treaty. Nothing like that exists. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, and Putin claiming that erroneously. And again, these countries are wanting to join NATO for a reason. Like, why would you join NATO? What's the reason for joining NATO?
Well, there's two reasons. It could be because you're concerned about an attack from an enemy, or it could be because you are part of an aggressive force yourself. Both sides in the Cold War claimed that they were just defensive and the other side was bad.
No, NATO ultimately is a defensive pact. Its very motto is "You attack one, you attack all."
Yeah. On the subject of the kind of propaganda I'm seeing at the moment. Now, you mentioned computer hacking. You take that. Do you believe these stories about computer hacking? Do you believe they're all true?
Again, we've been seeing evidence that again, most of these hacks have been coming from Russia. And again, Russia and Putin have spent vast fortunes, as we even saw in our own referendum, cyber attacks and promotion of, for the Leave campaign by Russian trolls. That exists. We know that. We know that there was, again, a very large amount of money deposited to one Mr. Aaron Banks, who doesn't know how he managed to get all that money. Quite mysterious.
So, I mean, another is the issue of dangerous pilots, which I brought up these subjects in my own live stream. There have been, for example, Russian military aircraft have entered British airspace a few times.
Yeah, we've just actually had one today. Actually, fighters have been scrambled from Scotland. Literally just this evening. I think it was about half 3 or something like that.
Well, let me just refresh it. All right.
Fighters were scrambled this today.
Yeah. All right. It was originally said unknown aircraft. It now says Russian aircraft. Okay. Okay. So what else was there? The issue of poisoning. Now I don't have all the details to hand, but there's over the Navalny poisoning. Now, you know, Navalny, you say he was persecuted. Putin has been persecuting his enemies, apparently his political opponents, like Navalny. Alexei Navalny is now. We heard that he'd been sent to a camp. Now, this conjures images of the gulags. Although I'm kind of guessing these institutions have improved slightly since the days of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. His sentence was 2 years. Now, if that was treason, I mean, he's not high treason because he's not a statesman. He's actually opposition, but he should get a longer sentence than that. Do you know? You know, so I'm concerned. I did actually do an entire radio show about this, and I don't have all the details to hand.
That happened to coincide when, you know, all the elections and stuff were going on. Very convenient to lock your opponent up in prison while, you know, so he can't campaign. That's quite convenient then. Very convenient.
There's also the issue of the poisoning. He apparently was poisoned from a water bottle, and it had Novichok on it, the same poison that was allegedly used in Salisbury against the Skripals. Again, this doesn't. I don't have all the details to hand. There were question mark. There are some issues of dispute over exactly what was going on there. What was really going on there with Navalny? Don't have all the details to hand, but let's go. What was it?
Here's a question: What would happen, for example, if Boris Johnson was very much like, you know, Vladimir Putin, and all of a sudden, you know, Keir Starmer gets poisoned?
Well, it could be that it could be that, for example, it could be that the dictators in Brussels decided that if Starmer was like trying to maybe kill Boris Johnson, for example, or foment some kind of coup d'état, the dictators in Brussels, you know, von der Leyen and all those others were going, let's get Keir Starmer to do this, and suddenly he gets poisoned. Now, it could be that Johnson did it, although Boris Johnson will probably be on his side these days, or it could be that it's a false flag. It's designed to demonize the regime that is standing up to whoever is the aggressor. These things do happen.
So again, there's no reason for like where this poisoning really just comes from nowhere.
Well, there's no
it has to come from someone who, again, wanted to take him out.
Well, I'll give you another example. Would be Sergei and Yulia Skripal. Now, they were not in hiding. I mean, oddly enough, Oleg Gordievsky's still in hiding. I don't know why that is. He was an old Soviet dissident, so I don't know why he's still in hiding. But see, the Skripals actually, if they were really, really in big trouble, if they were really, really enemies of the Russian state, they wouldn't be wandering around Salisbury going to pubs. Now, during the Soviet Union, of course, this was always a big thing, because when it came to spies and dissidents, there was a very asymmetric attitude towards revenge and retaliation. So, for example, if you were a Soviet agent who betrayed the state, you would never ever be able to walk free again. You couldn't go out of your house without minders. You'd have to be armed wherever you went, because the Russians the Soviets would track you down and kill you. And they did it very famously in 1940 with Leon Trotsky. They tracked him down to his hideout in Mexico and put an ice pick through his head. Now, from what we gather, there's the Russian Federation maybe doesn't, I don't know exactly what its policy is now, but I know that Oleg Gordievsky, who's actually a Soviet dissident, he's never portrayed the modern Russian Federation, is still in hiding since he defected, I think, in 1986. There's a very exciting book that was written about it, actually, which is really, really good. The Skripals, I don't believe, were in danger of being persecuted by the Russian state. They apparently were local people about town. They used to wander around freely. And then they suddenly end up being poisoned. Suddenly they end up being poisoned, and the Russians did it. And we know because there were 2 CCTV footage of some guys supposedly Russian. So why did the FSB suddenly that's the Russian Secret Service, suddenly decide that the Skripals actually were targets and they wanted to get rid of them?
Well, it's a spy agency, Ben. You know, you go and you strike when your opportunity is best best available. You know, it's not always best to strike, you know, while the iron is hot. Maybe, you know, you let the you know, the heat cool down a bit before you actually go into to strike on these type of things. You know, they could have been, you know, waiting for them to split up. They just to not slip up. They might have been waiting for them to, you know, think that the heat is off them. This is why, again, they might have been known more people about the town. You know, this is the world of spying. This is how obviously things, you know, happen. Stuff we might never even know, maybe for 100 years before, you know, like the, you know, Secret Act comes up. You know,
well, to be fair, people like
you
know, people like Kim Philby and that, when they defected, they you know, they would turn up in Russia and do they would do like press conferences in hotels, and the Guardian would come along and things like that. Right. Okay. That's all my notes. I think I don't have anything. I think I've covered everything.
Yeah, actually, no, I've got a question here. So,
sure.
Do you think we should be supporting Ukraine with your weapons?
If it's a yes no, if it's a yes no thing, I would say no.
Why not?
Because for the reasons I've been explaining to you, I don't think it's as black and white as we've been led to believe.
So you don't think that we should supply Ukraine with weapons so that if they do get invaded, that they stand a fighting chance? Because currently there are no UN troops in Ukraine.
There are actually about 300 experts in the use of the NLAW missile, which Britain has supplied. Now, these are advisors. They're actually there to train the troops in the use of these very potent anti-tank weapons. They're handheld missiles that can destroy an entire tank. On the other hand, though, that's how the Vietnam War started. It started with some advisors going over to Vietnam from the United States. And before you know it, there's 2 million people. It's 10 years later and 2 million people are dead. You see...
So is Ukraine going to attack Russia? So is Ukraine going to attack Russia?
Well, not on its own, no. But I suspect that this is part of an attack against Russia by globalist forces.
Okay,
that's my concern.
So what's the end game for that then? Like, take me through that.
What do you mean? What the solution is?
No, take me through that. Yeah.
Well, how it would be achieved, I'm not actually certain, but I do know that there have been attempts to sabotage the Russian economy. For example, Trevor Murray, who presents Third Rail Radio with me, he talked about the Canadian oil workers who've been put out of work, and the actual crash in oil prices was actually specifically intended to sabotage the Russian economy. There's been the attacks, you mentioned it yourself in your videos, the Nord Stream pipeline. There's the other pipeline that goes through Poland. They've both been shut down due to technicalities. Which is serious. It's serious for the people of the European Union and surrounding countries, because Russia supplies a lot of natural gas to us. I do think they don't. The Russian Federation is from a New World Order point of view, the Russian Federation is a monster that has emerged, which they never intended to create. I believe that possibly in the 1970s, the decision was made to end the Cold War, and Mikhail Gorbachev was the man to do it. But I don't believe the USSR was meant to turn into the Russian Federation. I believe it was meant to become de facto a democracy, but maintain its de jure status as the USSR. And that never happened.
So I think I heard you say this on your live stream as well. But you believe that Russia, as it exists today, is a country that exists against the globalist elites?
Yes.
So how can you square that away with the fact that in Russia today it is predominantly dominated by oligarchs, most of them very, very rich individuals? How do you know that? Again, you say that it is the rich elites that again do this, but Russia is dominated by rich elite individuals.
Yeah, rich elite individual. I know. I mean, they took over the entire economy in the 90s when all the state assets were sold off after the Soviet Union. But I don't claim that Russia is somehow necessarily fighting back against the agenda to create a one world government. I don't believe they're necessarily doing that. I believe that Putin is essentially a nationalist. I don't consider him aware of everything that's going on in the world to that position, and I don't. yeah, I don't consider Russia sort of like perfect or anything else. I don't consider it some kind of beacon of freedom or anything in this world. I just believe it is not doing what it's told. I think it's not doing what it's told. It's not. It's been a major thorn in the side. It's been an obstacle in what I perceive in other areas to be an increasing drive towards internationalism and authoritarianism across the globe.
And you don't think that Russia's authoritarian under Putin?
Well, not. It's well, as I say, it's a nation under. I believe it's a nation under siege, essentially. But I mean, I'd have to look more into that, I think, to answer that correctly. However,
I completely disagree that it's a nation under siege. It is a nation that has continually committing aggressive acts against its neighbors. It wants to reestablish again the sphere of influence, and if we did that, that would mean leaving countries like Poland, Romania, the Baltic nations, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, Czech Republic, essentially to the mercies of
they just become
Russia.
These will become client states of the Russian Federation.
Yes, that's entirely what it means when we want to set up these sphere of influences. These said he wants to reestablish the buffer states. These buffer states would be essentially pretty much almost become under the almost indirect control like Belarus is. Belarus again is pretty much does whatever Russia wants. That is what Putin wants for Ukraine. In fact, prior to, again, all of this, you look at the elections for the pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian side, again, in their parliament, they were very, very equal. In fact, if you want to say that he wanted to keep that state of affairs, when he annexed Crimea, he actually took away 5 parliament seats, I think it was, in their parliament that were very, very pro-Russian. This has now actually swung the favor of the voting strength, considering, again, like I say, the votes would normally be on the knife edge, literally like 4 points in voting of who won versus like the pro Western parties and the pro-Russian parties. He took away those 5 pro-Russian parties that have actually left them far more diminished in the Ukraine parliament. So it's again might not best be the most tactical solution to it, but again, to secure Crimea, again, which was overwhelmingly viewed by the Russian people as a good thing, then yeah. But again, it doesn't really stack with the whole, the new world order and these globalist elites. I don't think it plays when you look at how Russia indeed stands today. And again, the amount of dirty money that Russia pumps not only through places like here in the UK, but everywhere else in the world. It doesn't seem to those two viewpoints don't seem to stack.
I don't have the answers to hand to that, actually. I know I've covered this in the past. I've done several radio shows on the subject, but I don't have the information to hand. But yeah, I've kind of I can't really give any other answer other than I've already done. But, that's all my notes, really. That's all. That's all I can go through right now.
Just as another question, economic size. What do you think is actually the size of the Russian economy?
In terms of what, GDP, things like that?
No, just like how you say it's been sabotaged.
Well, there was attempts to sabotage. There were attempts to sabotage it. Yeah.
If you could like equate it to another country, like what size of like other economies do you think it should be like?
Well, off the top of my head, I don't know. I don't have the information. There were attempts to attack Russia. I believe there was what looks like an economic war that was started. When was it? I think 2008, or maybe later. But I don't have the actual details.
So, Russia's economy has been terminally in the toilet ever since really the fall of the USSR. Russia's economy is actually the exact same size as Italy's, which for a country again the size of that Russia is, just shows how bad the economy of Russia indeed is. It's tanking. Things are not good in Russia, despite how Russia today might like to portray how everything is hunky dory in Russia, and Europe's absolutely a terrible hellhole. It couldn't be backwards. Russia is indeed the almost failing economically, while Russia again, got to look at like the former Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, have come on immensely, not only since gaining their independence from the USSR, but also joining the EU, have benefited massively economically. Estonia, in particular, has gone on to become easily the center point and almost become the Silicon Valley of Europe through its efforts and investment into technology.
I mean, I can just report what the Russians I know tell me, which is that things have improved enormously since the 90s. That's the immediate post-Soviet. There was an enormous amount of post-Soviet chaos, which has improved enormously. That's all what they tell me. Their lives have improved enormously. As far as that, they're not every single Russian, obviously, and they're not economists. They don't have the statistics, but that's all I know from their perspective.
Do you, I want to just cover the EU, because I think a lot of people in my chat would like me to cover that. What's your viewpoint of the EU, Ben?
It's something I'm opposed to. It's we're going down a rabbit hole here, Ollie. I was a Brexiteer. I am a Brexiteer. I voted Leave, and I supported the Leave campaign completely. I believe that Britain should be independent. Britain it has a right to be independent, like all nations, and I wouldn't want to see a Britain occupied by the Continental Federation any more than I want any sovereign state to be occupied by any federation against their will.
It wasn't really occupied. We had no occupying force when we were in the EU.
We had numerous laws that were dictated from Brussels, which we had to obey as members.
Like.
I don't know off the top of my head. I can't remember them. There was red Leicester cheese, for example. There was some rule that said that the colouring was wrong. The carotene colouring of red Leicester cheese was not allowed. We were forced to use foreign measurements for many, many things.
Rather than switching over from the imperial to the metric system.
We were forced to use the measurements of the occupier rather than our own indigenous ones.
Not really.
Well, we still use
the metric system is actually far more accurate than the imperial system.
Accurate?
Yes,
you mean it measures things better?
Yeah,
it's decimal.
The metric system is far more better than the imperial system.
But it's decimal
metric stuff.
Well, of course it's decimal, which makes it easier to understand. Indeed, our currency was decimalized, when the EEC Act was put into place. But it's not part of our indigenous culture. Your shopkeepers, for example, who continue to use imperial measures, were prosecuted very, very heavily at the same time when muggers were being allowed out of jail, because they were. I think it was some kind of fraud they got them on, some kind of trading standards fraud or something.
Yes, what they were told to do again because the act came in, they had a full year to adopt and change over to these settings. Now, what they basically said was, you can still use imperial measurements, but you also must display the metric measurements by the sides of it. Again, this is. Again, because we had switched over to the metric system, we weren't using the imperial measurement system anymore. Again, imperial measurement system, I think there's only 3 other countries in the world that actually use the imperial measurements anymore. Like I say, everyone's pretty much switched over at this point to it. So I think going back would be very, very much a backward step in that. But these people were arrested because they refused to display the metric measurements, which again comes under the Trading Standards Act, what the law they were prosecuted under for not displaying correct information. Which to a shopper, if you are not displaying, if you walk into Tesco's and you buy a product and Tesco was not displaying the correct information to you, that is again against the trading standards, and you would have a case against Tesco or any other person that was offering you goods under that act.
Well, I'm aware that the law is imposed. Yeah, I mean, just out of curiosity, as an aside, you say that 3 countries use imperial measurements. I know the United States does. UK. What's the third one? So it's an aside. I can look that up later.
I don't know, but I think it's a very small one somewhere.
Okay. Now, but you see, what how these shopkeepers felt, right? They felt, I know it may sound trivial, and I'm not equating the two things, but they may have felt similarly to how the people in Ukraine felt when they were told you can't speak your language anymore, you have to speak Russian. It's not. I know it's not. It's on a different scale, but it's a similar sense.
Different scale.
But it's a similar thing. This is something that is part of our.
But they had a
culture.
year. They had a year to get to this. All the councils were like, look, we're switching over to the metric system. Britain is switching over.
The point is that the imperial system is something. It has a sentimental connection to our culture. That's the point. It doesn't matter how long it was they had to switch over. They shouldn't have been forced to switch over at all. People had a right to resist its imposition by the occupier on our nation, and they did, and I supported them 100%.
But we had a vote in Parliament.
Yeah, but we voted in Parliament on all kinds of things, including the sea thing we're not allowed to talk about on YouTube. Which, again, I don't trust MPs. I don't. I know
you said that countries should be allowed to make their own sovereign decisions.
Yeah.
Again, we voted. We had EU parliamentary elections. They went up for, again, parliamentary elections in there that happened over there. The laws are then sent over from once they've been passed there for that local countries can pass them, and then they can then be passed back if there are problems. We've seen this before. This is how, again, the EU works. And you can pass or choose not to pass said European laws. Most of these laws were passed because, again, it makes perfect economic sense. If you are building a massive single market, to have all the same rules and regulations, because it makes trade infinitely easier.
Yeah. Oh, there's several points you brought up there. I mean, firstly, I think certainly the last couple of years has certainly made me wonder about the true loyalties of the Westminster Parliament, whether it actually does represent us, and whether it actually is a lawful in terms of constitution. The other was you mentioned you mentioned that the laws would be passed in the EU by the EU government, the Commission and the Parliament. Then they would be sent to the countries for them to decide what to do with them.
Yeah.
And so if Britain had turned this down, Brussels would have gone, okay, you keep your pounds and ounces then. They would have said that, would they?
Ultimately, yeah. It would have gone back to the EU Parliament, and the EU Parliament would have gone, okay, well, now we've got a problem. We're now going to actually negotiate and find out what we're going to do. But again, moving over to the metric system made far more sense. Economically, it made far more sense. The measurements of it are far more accurate, especially when most of the world is now trading under the system. It's far easier to perform trade around the world if everyone's using the same, weights and measurements. You only have to go back a couple of years and talk to people who were, again, working in like engineering companies using these systems. There were bridges built that were built to like the imperial measurement system in this country, that when they went over, they'd actually measured them in the metric system, but the bridge was not the correct size because, again, they'd been built to the wrong measurements because of the confusion that had caused. That's a real world situation.
And conversion is conversion really that difficult? I mean, I convert when I do my space weather reports on the Herpanlo show, as you know, because you've been a guest on the Herpanlo show. You know that I convert all the metric measurements on my space weather reports into imperial. It takes me about 10 minutes to do the entire space weather report. Engineers should have a much easier time of it, simply out of respect for the culture of our country, to convert these measurements. It really shouldn't be that difficult.
It was never a big deal. Honestly, if you're crying about the loss of imperial measurements, I think there's far more bigger issues, especially in this country, to really be take issue at than the loss of imperial measurements. And to be honest, the fact that we've had, the Brexit paper saying, "Oh, we can go back to imperial measurements," is completely ridiculous. It doesn't make sense economically now today to do that.
I admit it's not a big issue in that sense. It's something trivial, but I think people, especially we in Britain, I know a lot of people, we tend to be quite sentimental about these little things. And there's a guy called Anthony.
It shouldn't matter if you're sentimental about something. If it's like you're not sentimental about your phone. When you get a new phone, you upgrade it. It's a better phone, but there's no reason to be sentimental about it.
I'm not anti-progress. I'm not anti-progress at all. I'm not. But it's just sometimes there's so many things are sacrificed for the sake of progress, which may turn out not to be of benefit. I'm sure I can think of a wonderful example in a minute. There's a guy called Anthony Bennett, actually, I've just been emailing, because the latest edition of the Highway Code actually uses metric measurements for how far or how far you should pass a bicycle or a horse if you're driving along a road, and it says 2 meters. It shouldn't say 2 meters because because highway measurements are still imperial here. So I'm wondering what he'll make of that. It's no, I mean, foreign occupation can take many different forms. It can be severe in some ways or another. From what we've seen, though, anyone who shrugs their shoulders and thinks, well, it's not a big deal, it could be a thin end of a wedge. For example, we're now seeing a vast amount of authoritarianism in this world, based on the pretext of something
like Russia.
we're not. Well, no, because it's actually something we're not allowed to talk about on YouTube, but it refers to a disease that's currently sweeping the world. A vast amount of authoritarianism.
We call it the Backstreet Boys tour.
Is it what?
If you want to get around, just call it the Backstreet Boys World Tour.
Right. Oh, I didn't know that one. I've heard of C word, and I've known lots of code words people use.
So yeah, the Backstreet Boys World Tour. Perfect example of this. That's what's going on. Remember, folks, Backstreet's back, although it's now going away. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
In fact, it's actually kind of funny because I've actually just finished a contract last Friday working for my local council, being actually a COVID communicator, getting people to, again, get the boosters, get their vaccines, giving them, again, information on how to stay safe during all this. So I've actually been at the heart of many of these things. In fact, I also... Yeah, I know. I'm part of the deep state now, Ben.
Well, I can't actually answer that without breaking YouTube's TOS, so I'll say no more. But I was contacted by someone who claimed you were MK Ultra. I don't think you are wrong. I don't think you are, honestly.
Right. But
I don't think you are.
The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is you mentioned the Freedom Rally in Canada.
Yeah.
Do you want to take your tell that is?
Yeah, it's inspiring to see so many people. It's inspiring to see so many people rising up against this kind of authoritarianism that I've been talking about. It really is. I've got a friend, like I said, Trevor Murray, the guy who talked about Russia with me, who co-hosts Third Rail Radio with me. He lives in Canada, and he's been filming the truckers driving past all these massive 18-wheel lorries. There's over 70,000 of them now, and that to me it's been called one of the biggest protests in the history of the world, and I don't think it can be stopped.
What if I were to tell you that has actually been funded by far right groups?
Is this far right? See, far right can mean many things. It can simply be people who say, white people aren't actually evil, are they? That's been described as hate speech when you say that.
Well, no, these far-right groups have been heavily involved in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, anti-Islam stuff. One of their founding leaders of the original one that was meant to take place originally before that fell to pieces, he was pushed away for being far too toxic when he would talk about the need for making sure that essentially white people breed so that we aren't outbred. It's kind of a weird movement, to be honest.
But you're not talking about Rebel Media, are you?
No, not Rebel Media, but I think they probably wouldn't surprise me if they have fingers in this. But like I say, the truck protest in Canada has been entirely organized by right wingers who, again, they make the claim that it's all meant to be like truckers' rights and things like that. But again, many truckers in Canada do not have pension rights, full pension rights. They do not have for full hours. They are on 0-hour contracts. That's really what matters for these should matter for these truckers. But there hasn't been a word said about these things. Indeed, the Truckers Union of Canada has come out and said that they are against these protests because, again, they have been funded by far-right figures and groups.
What do you say funded? I mean, for example, firstly, you see, whenever the term far right comes up, everyone, it's like it's been applied. I think it's a term that's been tossed around quite casually, like racist, sexist, misogynist, and things like this. It's been tossed around very, very casually, and I think it's lost its meaning through overuse and misuse. I mean, I'm not. If someone comes to me and says, white people are not evil, I'm not going to call that person hateful. Now, so I don't even know which organization you're talking about. If you're talking about people who advocate the extermination of other peoples, then that I would call evil, and I would be against that. But if you're talking about people who say, are white people really evil? Men are not all rapists, are we? And things like that, then I don't consider that hateful. I wouldn't have a problem with people like that being involved.
So I'm just going to bring up a website now. Hang on, let's read through this. Hang on, what's it now? Come on.
Elon Musk apparently supporting them. He's apparently behind.
Yeah, there's a lot of people supporting them, not really understanding the deeper.
Well, it's to me
how these really started.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so if this is some kind of like, I don't know what the origins of it are. I mean, if this is simply as some kind of front for some kind of evil subversive death cult or something, and of course I don't have that information. I wouldn't want that. I want it to be something honest, and I think most of the people involved are honest. They even expelled someone from their protest for waving a Confederate flag. So
yeah, that's quite interesting, considering again a lot of the stuff of the protest have been flying Confederate flags, Nazi flags in there.
If they split if they're not feds, I mean, some of them are going to be feds, aren't they? They do turn up and they do these sort of things.
So here we are. Are you aware of the antihate.ca?
I've not heard of it, no. But whenever I hear that, again, I hear the term anti-hate quite a lot, and there's other organizations I am familiar with who call people, they use the term, right? Antihate.ca, right? I don't know anything about this organization, but what's it saying? I'll continue with the point I was making afterwards.
So I'll just go through this. So this comes from a website called antihate.ca. The title of the article is "The Freedom Convoy is nothing but a vehicle for the far right." They say it is about truckers and that they have raised over $6 million on GoFundMe. But if you look at the organizers and promoters, you'll find Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, racism, and incitements to violence.
Right.
So the crowdfunded convoy ostensibly is fighting against a mandate for truckers to be vaccinated. This has raised over $6 million, and its two GoFundMe organizers are previously known figures in Canada's far-right ecosystem, and they have publicly made Islamophobia comments, and the loudest promoter, Pat King, is a racist who has tried to incite his audience to violence more times than he actually can count. And he's so bad for their public image that after the organizers have actually tried to put some distance for them. Some convoy supporters, like the Largon Network, are even saying that they want this to be Canada's very own January the 6th.
Right, I've never heard of this guy, Pat King. What I do know is that there are other. I can't comment on this particular organisation, and I don't know who they're talking about. What I can say is there are other organisations which have terms like anti-hate, and they, for example, attack David Icke, and they say that he is hateful. When I know from meeting, I've been studying his work very closely. He's one of the least hateful people around. I know he made a bungle over the People's Voice. We discussed that on my show, but he's a good guy. And they refer to, you see, this is what I mean when I say that these words are sometimes, I think they're sometimes overused and misused. Therefore,
I don't think it is, to be honest, in this. I think this is yet another attempt by some very, very bizarre, again, far-right people trying to essentially make themselves appeal more appealing. Again, as they said at the beginning of that article, they've tried to say that it's about truckers' rights, but again, it's anything but. When the people organising this rally have said openly very Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, and racist things. I don't think this is something you support.
If you look at what the truckers are like, these people, these are guys, these are working class men doing almost all men doing their job. They're fed up with, they've been told basically that they've been against all medical law. They're being told they have to have forced medication without informed consent to do their job.
Many of the truckers have had their vaccines.
Yes, and they're supporting the ones now who say we don't want that, and they're against they've chosen to have their V words, but they don't see. I've chosen not to smoke. I don't smoke, but I oppose the smoking ban in pubs because I believe people have the right to choose to smoke if they want. We're adults. We're not little kids. And basically, old Justin Castro, whatever his name is, he's telling them, no, there will be consequences if you say no to this medical treatment, which is against the whole idea of informed consent in medical law. And the truckers themselves, I've seen them being cheered on by people of all colours. I've seen them they've been waving back at people of all colours. They are not racists. They're not any of these things, these buzzwords that keep being labelled on people. So that's, if without more information, I can't say more than that.
There's also, they're also trying to promote yellow vest as well, which again is very, very different from the yellow vest protest in France. The yellow vests in Canada are very much a hate group. Again, there's a video here of Pat King saying exactly this, full anti-Semitic and racist, but I'm not going to play it here.
I don't know who that is. But like, for example, have you heard of Stefan Molyneux?
Yep.
Yeah, he's a Canadian. He's been tarred with the same brush essentially as this. But if you listen to what he actually says, it's a complete unfair labeling of this man.
Not really. He's a nationalist. He went to Poland and said that having he openly crying because again he could so happy they could see so many white faces in the crowd that he was within. Again, not really a guy we should be supporting, to be honest.
That's not a bad thing, though, is it? I mean, I
crying that you can see so many white faces in the crowd. That's a bit of a racist thing.
Is it? I mean, if I was at a hip hop concert, I'd probably say, well, there's a lot of black people here. That's great. I hope you're enjoying yourself. That's it's great to see so many black people attending. That's wonderful. So then suddenly when it's white people, it's different. Suddenly when it's white people, it's hate. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's an ethical contradiction.
Not really. He's more saying priding himself on the fact that there are, again, so many white people around, hence the word why he does get tarred and feathered, quite rightly so, as a nationalist, and again, white nationalist. Like I say, we could delve down that rabbit hole, but we've gone on long enough, to be honest.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
But yeah, please do not support the Freedom Convoy. It's not what you think. So I definitely advocate you having a look more into this, and definitely check out this website. This has a lot of information about these people.
If it turns out to be something truly criminal and advocating for criminal actions, yeah, of course, I'd never be involved in that. No.
So yeah,
it's been fun, I've enjoyed this.
Thanks for joining us, man.
No problem. I'll share a link on my Panmo Voice blog, so my readers can watch it. And thanks everyone for watching.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Bye everyone.
Okay. Bye. Oh, there we go. Get the right button.